So welcome to my house. So my name is Terra. I know most of you here, but I actually don't know everybody here, so that's pretty cool. I've got some friends from church, some friends from the neighborhood, some friends from way back when, some random friends that are connected to other friends that have been friends in the past, and so thank you guys for coming out. So I know the way that I kind of started this thing off was with three kind of big questions or comments, like, do you hate meal planning, which my husband could attest that I hate it with a passion, or hitting like 3 o'clock and going, oh my God, I don't even know what I'm gonna do for dinner tonight. I do that fairly often as well. And then, or like you get really excited about meal planning, but then you pull out 50 recipes or you start actually making them and it takes you 2 hours to make one recipe and you go, I'm never doing that again, because that was a nightmare. So the whole purpose of this class is to kind of get around those things. So this is obviously not a class that's going to teach you everything there is to know about cooking. But my goal is to make it as simple as possible, as basic as possible, and help you guys kind of be able to figure out how to do things without always having to rely on a recipe or without always having to meal plan, et cetera, et cetera. So to begin with, I just wanted to discuss kind of like what an ideal meal looks like. So, you know, a meal might look like anything, but an ideal meal by nutritional standards typically has some sort of a protein, some sort of healthy fats, some sort of starches or carbs, and some sort of non-starchy vegetables. Okay, that's kind of the general. Some people also will throw in dairy. I have some thoughts about that, but we'll leave those for another day. If you like dairy, dairy works well with you, go for it, throw it in there, but I don't think it's necessary. With that, a lot of times if you think about traditional, like easy go-to meals, whether it be like a microwave meal or whether it be something simple like macaroni and cheese or peanut butter and jelly sandwich or stuff like that, start thinking about like how those reach those, you know, protein, fats, carbs, veggies. You're going to get a couple of them in there regardless of what you eat. Even if it's just straight up carbs, you're going to get some of them in there. But this isn't necessarily a healthy cooking class, but I'm going to teach you how you can do it healthy cooking wise. So, you know, if you are kind of coming at it from that perspective and you're wanting to have more healthier foods in there, if you can try to go with all of those different things, at least a little bit of each of those different things at a meal, that's going to square you out. Or if for some reason, like one meal you do have only macaroni and cheese, try to round it out at your next meal. You know, just don't do that like all day long, carb, 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 and nothing else. A lot of times when people think about eating healthy, especially veggies, there's usually about a handful or less that you actually like or that you actually know how to cook or have eaten at all in the past. But whether you know it or not, there's actually a whole bunch of veggies out there that you may have no experience with whatsoever. So on this sheet, it's very generic, not so pretty, but just list of different types of vegetables and whether or not they're a starchy vegetable or a non-starchy vegetable, a root vegetable, et cetera, et cetera. It also lists the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 if stuff like that is something of concern to you, if, whether it's organic or has pesticides and stuff. And then on this side, this one's a lot prettier because this one isn't mine. Sorry, my hand's shaking here. It says at the top, phytonutrient spectrum checklist for kids, but this is just as applicable to adults. So what it does is it breaks all those fruits and vegetables up into colors. I know a couple of you have actually talked to about this, and so ideally, again, when you're meal planning, the more colors you have in your diet on a regular basis, the more vitamins, minerals, and nutrients you have. The typical standard American diet has a whole lot of brown. So if you think of like breads and grains and pastas, chicken nuggets, you know, cheeses might be able to go into that brown tan section. Like that's a very typical American diet, and we leave out all these other things either because we don't like them, we don't know how to cook them, we have no experience of them, we're scared of them, or whatever it might be. So this is just to kind of help those of you that are interested in kind of growing your, you know, forte and your palate in these areas. So I'm going to give this to you later just so you kind of have that to look at. And so let's see here. So the more kind of color you can add and the more variety you can add, the more nutrition you also add. So just to throw that out there. So how to cook it. Okay. So again, with the recipe book, you guys, like if you'd have told me 3 or 4 years ago that I'd be teaching a class on how to cook and make it simple, I probably would have laughed in your face because I would have said, I can't even cook. I can't even follow a recipe. I'm going to mess up my spaghetti. I think Neha and I have had these conversations. Like, I do these things. And so I feel like I've come a long ways over the years with some help from lots of people and lots of research and lots of trial and error. And so my first encouragement would be to kind of let go of a little bit of your expectations. Some of you guys, not all of you all, but some of you guys are going to have very high expectations of what you're making. You think that it has to be restaurant quality. It may or may not, but just kind of lower your expectations to begin with, because there's a lot of trial and error when you're learning. I used to get really frustrated with, I didn't really want to practice or try things because I despise wasting or throwing away food. But the problem is, if you don't practice things and try things, you also never grow and you never get any better. And so I had to really, I'm the type of person that has very high expectations for myself, so I had to lower those a little bit to begin with. So a couple of ways that I've found to make cooking simpler is a few different methods. So one is sauteing. I'm going to come back here in a minute to those proteins and stuff and where we're going to get the food to saute. But so a couple of simpler methods of cooking would be sauteing food. That would mean basically, I'm gonna pretend you don't know anything about it just because I know there are some people that may not. So there we go. So it would be taking some sort of a good quality oil. You can look online. I can send you details if you want to know what oils are best in heat or not, or et cetera, but some sort of a good oil that is good to heat. There are some that are better than others health-wise. Putting a little bit of oil, butter, something to that effect in your skillet and sauteing whatever it is you're cooking. We're going to get specific later. But that's the general sauteing. Typically, it's over about a medium-high heat. Kind of along those lines, you can take them into curries. So here's the thing with curries, though. When I was talking about having certain standards, when I say a curry, I'm not necessarily meaning like true fashion, good old Indian curry, because mine are probably nothing like a traditional Indian curry. But they're good and they're tasty, and for the most part, most of my family likes them, okay? So when I speak of curry, we actually had curry tonight for dinner. What I do is, well, I don't have my bottle of red curry right now. There's my refrigerator. But I keep I really like the red curry. So these little like Thai curry paste, it would basically mean picking a protein, like shredded chicken or beef or whatever it is, a couple of veggies, your choice, some red curry, like 2 teaspoons of red curry, and a can of coconut milk. And that's it. It's actually really simple. If all else fails and it doesn't have enough flavor, you add a little salt or pepper. If you want to get really wild, you can go into some herbs and spices, which we're going to get to. But for me, that's what I mean when I say curry. Again, that's not necessarily a traditional curry, but it makes food taste good, gives it a lot of flavor without having to dump a bunch of cheese or stuff. We have 3 people in the family that can't do cheese, so I tend to not, or can't do dairy. So I tend to not cook with dairy unless it's something, a side dish for those that can. So roasting can make veggies taste so much better. If you have tried steaming veggies and wonder why they have no flavor, it's because I recommend you not steam your veggies.
I have a good example for that.
Okay, let's hear it.
My kids hated green beans.
Okay.
With passion.
Okay.
It's so bad. So then eventually I learned, what I do now is I take a little bit of coconut oil and I take green beans and I added this roasted garlic seasoning from Kroger. And now, like, they
love them.
Will eat only green beans.
Awesome.
That's a side dish. They can just eat
You're like,
for the full meal.
Yes, awesome. That's awesome.
I totally understand.
Yes, absolutely. Which kind of comes to another point that I'm going to make, and you're going to see. I'm going to come to this here in a second. No, I'm going to come to it in a minute. But we're going to talk about preparing food different ways. Okay, so we'll come to that in a minute. But roasting food. So roasting is basically, and you can look up details about any of this stuff, or you can ask me and I'll send you details, but I'm kind of giving you an overview of some of this. Roasting is basically turning your good old oven on to 400, 425 depending, and taking whatever veggies you have cut up with, again, a good oil or butter or whatever you use. I'm telling you, salt and pepper are like your magical spices here. Well, not technically spices with salt, but garlic powder, onion powder if you want to throw a little something extra in there for a little bit of flavor. And it's a little, again, it's a little learning curve with how long. You know, smaller stuff like asparagus would be maybe 15 minutes at that temperature. You know, big, thick pieces of sweet potato, maybe 30, 35 minutes at that temperature. One way that you can kind of get a general idea of this is if you look up a recipe just real quick online, like how to roast sweet potatoes. You'll see somebody will say, you know, it'll be like 425 for 30 minutes. Okay, that's all I needed to know. And after a while, just doing that over and over again, you don't even have to look it up anymore, because after a while, you kind of get a good gauge of the thicker the vegetable or the denser the vegetable, the longer it's going to need to roast, and the thinner, vice versa. So sauteing, curries, roasting, the grill. If you really want to get out there. I used to be afraid of my grill. I singed my eyebrows one time. That was a lot of fun. You know, just like turning it on too high, and then our little button didn't work, so I had to light it with a lighter, and it's like whoosh. Yeah, that was exciting. Fortunately, they didn't burn off, and I didn't burn myself. But yeah, it smelled nice, you know, that burning hair smell. But the grill can be really nice for certain veggies because a lot of people, now you can kind of go all around the boat with how healthy the grill is for those of you all that are into that. Obviously, the more black, the more crispy you get something, the less nutritious it's going to be for you. But with that said, a lot of times, a lot of us like a little crispy on our foods. And so my kids, for example, will eat grilled butternut squash without nearly as many complaints as they will if I try to cube it or roast it or saute or, you know, something like that. And so, the grill can make things taste really nice too, and especially in the summer, as you know, not only is the weather nice, but it keeps the heat from the oven outside of your house out there. Now, of course, you're still gonna be hot while you're cooking it, but your house isn't gonna be roasting by the time you get done. And so, Instant Pot and Crock Pot. Okay, a lot of people have probably heard the rage. It's been all over Facebook, I think, about the Instant Pot. The Instant Pot is kind of the crock pot on steroids, okay? So I have a crock pot, but I am more or less a stay-at-home mom-ish. But I'm home a lot enough to where I don't usually have to use my crock pot like all day long. And actually all day long seems to me almost always to overcook anything I put in it if it's in it all day long. The Instant Pot can kind of take things down from an all day long process to a 30-minute to an hour and a half long process. So if you know you're going to be home by 4 or 5 and you don't mind eating at 6:30, you know, that might be a good variable for something that you can do versus a crock pot, especially if you didn't plan ahead, you didn't stick something in your crock pot, and it is 3 o'clock and you go, what am I going to cook? And you can throw it in the Instant Pot and that's okay. So I'm not going to open it right now or you will get the wafting smell of chicken because I cooked that chicken in here earlier. But the Instant Pot, like I said, is kind of like a crock pot on steroids. Honestly, there's like 15,000 options on here and I use one. Seriously, like the manual button here, just put it on whatever temperature. And again, same with everything else. When I first got it, I would look up, you know, Instant Pot roast, Instant Pot chicken wings, or whatever it is, and I get a general idea of a time, and then I know about how long it takes. For example, this chicken was a whole chicken, and it cooked completely in 35 minutes in the Instant Pot. And it was like a 5-pound chicken or something. It's a pretty good-sized chicken. And then I just, you know, took it out and shredded it. And then what I will do afterwards, if you're into making bone broth, your own broth for soups or anything like that, is I take all the skin, all the bones and everything, I throw them back in it, and then I'll set this thing. So instead of like bone broth having to simmer for 18 to 24 hours or whatever the recommended thing is, like you can do it in like 2, and it's done. Because it basically just pressure cooks everything that's inside it. So it's a big fancy pressure cooker. Our great-grandparents used to use pressure cookers, you know what I mean? But it's just on the stove top, and now we plug it up. And there's a lot less room for screwing it up in here. So that's an Instant Pot. Like I said, I'm not going to open that, or you will smell it, which may not be a bad thing, but then again, it may. Crock pot. So one rule of thumb, I'm going to kind of come into this one with the meats as well as veggies, is that just because you try a food one way doesn't mean you hate that food. It may mean you don't like it cooked that way. So my example up here, you all may see, and you can stand up if you want to, or you can stay seated. I've got 1,500 different versions of sweet potatoes. So we had some sweet potatoes with dinner tonight, and they were roasted. Okay, so just cut them up in little cubes, roasted them in the oven, 425 for like 30 minutes. Some people love these. I have one child that refuses to eat sweet potatoes regardless of how I cook them. But, you know, to each his own. Or this right here, these are sliced, and I'm going to tell you about my beautiful food processor here in a minute. So these here are sliced. You can take these, same thing, oil, salt, pepper, whatever else you may or may not want to throw on them. Cinnamon's good with sweet potatoes. And you can lay them one layer side by side and cook them, and they get a little bit crispier, a little more like a chip. Okay, so it's less mushy. Some people don't like mushy. This right here is grated in my food processor. You can take these and you can either throw them in something like a curry. I actually threw some in my curry earlier because it's going to cook super fast because it's really small. It's not going to take forever like those do. You can make like hash browns. You think about like traditional like hash browns or whatever. You can make hashes with them, which I'll talk about a hot plate here in a minute. This here is literally chopped. It's just straight up chopped. Again, there's different, I made them so many different ways just to kind of show you guys, like if you don't like it one way, consider trying to prepare it a different way. And you may find you may not fall in love with it, but you may not hate it as much, and it made me a little more preferable to be in something. My child that does not like sweet potatoes couldn't even really, I mean, he knew they were in there, but he couldn't even really taste them when they were shredded up like this in the middle of my curry. It just added a little sweetness to the curry, so. And then I left one big like this because some people like to just straight up bake them. My kids will not touch them if they are baked and mushy, and so that was a reminder there. You can mash them, if you like to mash them, but an example of this one, outside of the sweet potatoes, is a couple years ago, I was trying to get just some new veggies in our diet just to kind of, get some variety. And so I was like, I'm going to try parsnips. Half of you all are probably like, I don't even know what the heck a parsnip is. So parsnip looks like a giant carrot, except it's white. But it really looks like just a big white carrot is what it looks like. And so the way I had seen, what's that? It is a root vegetable, but it's not a radish. So, I mean, it's like this big. I mean, it's really big. And a radish a little more rounded. Radish has got a little peppery taste. A parsnip, a parsnip could be a little peppery as well. But when I first read all the, recipes and everything online for parsnips, was all like mashed parsnips, like mashed potatoes. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. Nobody liked them. Not one person in the single family liked them. And I was like, okay, that was a flop. And again, back to the whole, throw that in the garbage, like we all tried it, but nobody really liked it. So when you're first trying stuff, you could always make less of it the first time. So you're not throwing away a big heaping portion and make that be like maybe like the micro side dish you're adding to dinner that night, instead of like a big heaping portion of it. But then I thought, okay, I'm not giving up. I am done giving up on this. And so I peeled them and then I sliced them and I cooked them like chips. And we had more than half the people thought they were excellent. So not just okay, like they were like, these are really good. Yes, I got a new way, got a new veggie in there, cooked a different way. So just being willing to experiment, like even with chicken. So like I said, this is from my whole chicken and I've got it all shredded up. Some people look at that and they're like, I don't want that, but they're more than willing to eat a piece of fried chicken or whatever. And so you just, kind of get creative with that. While we're talking about that, I'm actually going to start something over here. So I'm going to start a meal tonight. It's not going to be enough to feed you all, but you are all welcome to try it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start this so I can be talking while I'm doing this. So one of the dishes that I make very regularly, and it changes very regularly, is what Melissa Jewelwin in the book Well Fed To, it's a cookbook. She's one of the big Whole30 people. But she comments and she calls this a hot plate. So basically her idea is what I'm getting ready to do. I'll just tell you as I'm doing it. So first, this right here is sun-dried tomatoes and olive oil. I get these at Costco. They're amazing. They taste so good if you go to Costco. I personally don't like tomatoes, but I love sun-dried tomatoes. I think they are phenomenal. And I have a couple of kids the same way. They won't eat a regular tomato. Typically, like for a pan this size here, you can see I've got about a tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half or so of oil in there. And then really the amount of tomatoes is going to depend on your preference and how many people you're feeding. I have 5 kids, so I usually have to make a lot of food. And with that being said, even if you don't have a lot of kids, even if you're single, let me tell you how much easier it is to make enough for 2 or 3 nights so you have leftovers than it is to have to make a new meal every night. So one very helpful way of not having to constantly be in your kitchen is by making a double or a triple batch of whatever you're making and saving some for later in the week, either for lunch or another dinner. So I already got that on. So I usually just put it on a medium-high temperature. About on my oven, it goes up to, or my stove, it goes up to a 10. I've got it on a 6 right now, just long enough to get it warmed up, and then I'll keep going from there. This right here, food processor. This is my baby. It's heavy, it's bulky, it's big, but it's my favorite tool in my kitchen. With that being said, this is not cheap, but I broke 2 of these before this one because I used it so much and I got tired of them breaking, so I invested. And if you're gonna invest, grab a 20% off coupon at Bed Bath & Beyond and get it there. I'll just throw that in there. But so this is my food processor. I use this at least every other day, if not more often than that. All of the ways you'll just saw me prepare these veggies over here, I do in this. So you've basically, honestly, if you want to make smoothies in here, you could. I have a Vitamix. I don't use a Vitamix nearly as much as I use this, unless it's for a smoothie. You got your grating thing, there's a slicing tool, and then there's the chopping one as well. The beauty of this is the fact that you can do these types of things way faster. So, if you imagine taking by hand and slicing this up, it's going to take you a lot longer I mean, probably 5 times longer or more than it is to just throw that in there, and it's literally like 30 seconds, and it's done. That thing is a time saver, big time. Grating, same things. If you stand with a handheld grater, you're going to be standing with a handheld grater for quite some amount of time. So just some things to consider there. Let's get all my tools here. You can hear it starting to sizzle a little bit. I don't want it to sizzle too long without putting something else in it, because if I do, my tomatoes or the olive oil itself is going to burn, and I don't want that to happen. So I am going to take, so you see asparagus here. Again, most people think of asparagus and preparing it straight up like this, right? Grill it like this or put it in your oven like this. The problem is a lot of times it's not really easy to eat like this, right? I mean, how many times you sit there and you're like, how do I even do this? And you try to cut it, but it's too hard to actually cut. Or you pick it up and bite it and it's like stringy and like hanging out of your mouth. But that's kind of like the, the way you're supposed to eat it. But I found the Santos recommended way of eating it is by chopping it up in these little pieces. I have washed my hands, by the way. And it's bite-sized, especially in stuff like this right here. So I'm putting the asparagus in first because asparagus is going to take a little longer to cook than any of the other things I put in here. And I know that just from practicing and being in the kitchen that the asparagus is going to take just a little bit longer. Most of the things I already have tonight that I'm going to put in here are already cooked. So just to throw that out there. So I'm going to let that saute for just a minute. You can also roast them like that too. It won't take long at all. Asparagus doesn't take long to roast anyway because it's really small. Again, kind of back to thinking through like the size and how long it's going to take to roast. So the food processor is my best friend in the kitchen. Like I said, that was something that I saved up for and has been great. If you don't ever do root veggies, you could probably get away with using a lesser expensive one. I kept breaking mine with squash and sweet potatoes. So, because I kept trying to slice them and they just hated me. So, let's see here. I've got this going over here. Does anybody have any questions so far? I have a tendency to keep going. Ask me some questions if you, yes. How do you peel a squash? That's a good question. Well, it depends on what kind of squash you got because. Yeah. Well, so I got a couple different squash here. This is an acorn squash. This is by far going to be one of the hardest to peel, as you can imagine why. And so, I mean, if you're going to peel an acorn squash, there's inevitably going to be some in there, unless when you cut it down the ridges and individually peel it, which honestly, I don't have the time for, and I'm not going to mess with that. A lot of times what I do, just for lack of time, again, this probably wouldn't be culinary perfect, but for lack of time, maybe cut it. I will usually cut an acorn squash in half, put a little water in a pan, put them upside down, roast them in the oven, and then scoop it out. Okay. Because then you don't have to worry about it. Or if you really want to, I've actually sliced and grilled acorn squash. Just eat around the peel. You know what I mean? So you don't have to actually take the time to take it off. You just tell everybody, especially small kids, obviously, don't eat that part or it might not be very yummy. As far as butternut squash, again, I will straight up tell you guys with all my tips and tricks, I'm not going to tell you how professional culinary they are, but they work for me, okay? So I literally just use this type and just straight go down all the way around. Okay. That's all I do with it. And then, squash, as with anything, two kind of major tools that I also recommend in the kitchen are 2 good knives. One about this size. I used to sell Pampered Chef, so that's where these bad boys came from. One about this size, and then I have a huge one somewhere. As you can see, I forgot to set this stuff out after dinner, but like a chef's knife. I can't find it right now, but it's one of the big blades. So for something like this, I would use a chef's knife. And then this is a spaghetti squash here. Again, if you're trying to be healthy, somebody asked a post about this not too long ago on Facebook. I don't remember who it was. I don't know if there's anybody here or not, but they're like, what do I do with spaghetti squash? Like, I can't stand the taste of spaghetti squash. Honestly, I'm a little lazy with spaghetti squash. We cut it in half, same thing as with the acorn squash, roast it in the oven upside down, and then I get a fork and I scoop it out like spaghetti, and I serve it with spaghetti sauce and meat, just like I would spaghetti. That's my lazy, easy man's version of dealing with spaghetti squash. Obviously, you can do lots of different things with it. Any other questions so far about any of the things that we mentioned? Or I'm going to turn this down a little bit so it doesn't overcook while I'm talking. Mm-hmm. Which ones you said that you had a few that were breaking? Oh, that's a good question. I honestly don't even remember which ones I got. Most of the ones that I were getting were in the $30 to $50 range, and I kept breaking them, and so I basically just asked on a Facebook page, that is geared towards whole foods. Like I just asked them, hey, what do you guys use for a food processor? And like 8/10 of the people told me that thing right there. And so I was like, okay. It's a Cuisinart. That one's a 14-cup processor. You could probably get away with a smaller one, but again, we have a lot of people we feed. So it is heavy, it's bulky, but it's my favorite. I could get rid of a lot of things and not get rid of that. Other questions so far? Yeah, sure.
Like going back and forth.
Yeah.
And I feel like I get home like around 3:30, so I have time to cook.
Sure.
So I'll be like, oh, but it's not enough time to put in a crock pot.
Right.
Feeling. But then I don't like always the taste of like stews.
Yes, yeah. What I mainly cook in the Instapot is whole chickens because it's less expensive and healthier typically depending on the type of chicken you're getting to do that. So I will cook whole chicken. This is literally just shredded chicken that I cooked in there earlier that I'm putting in this pan here just to throw that in there. As you can see, I'm not measuring anything. I'm kind of eyeballing it based on how much I know people generally eat. And tonight, who all's here and anything that doesn't get eaten, I will stick in the refrigerator and use for a meal tomorrow. I generally cook whole chickens in there. I often cook roasts in there because a lot of times, again, I don't think to put it in a crock pot. A roast on the stovetop is going to probably take you at least 2 hours or more. I can cook a roast in there in about 30 minutes. Like a pot roast, and so good question. So like at the store it'd be like chuck roast or beef roast, or it's a great big hunk of meat. And so honestly, that was my absolute favorite dish growing up as a kid was pot roast and potatoes and carrots and all that good stuff. So it cooks those incredibly fast. I'm trying to think of what else I cook in there. Well, it might be about time for you. Yeah. And then if you do like the bone broth or anything, it's really nice to do that. I mean, you can use it for 1,000 different things. I tend to use it for meats that are going to take a long time to cook, or meats that are recommended slow cooking because I haven't started them earlier on, or I don't have time to do them earlier on. It's typically, for me, tends to be a lot of beefs. Sometimes even like pork chops one night. I hate dry pork chops. It just drives me nuts. I'd rather not even eat them. And so I just looked up a pork chop recipe on there and put them in there, and they were not the least bit dry. And so I was like, okay, that'll work. Now, obviously in there, you miss the whole crispy. There's not gonna be anything crispy in there. And so it's like, you gotta decide what you really want. You know, sometimes one recipe I even saw with the pork chops, actually, I think after you cooked it in there, you threw it in the skillet just for a few minutes just to kind of dry it out on the outside, but it was still moist on the inside. Of course, you're getting back into how much time you're willing to put into it at that point in time, but I was the same way. I went back and forth on it a while, and then around Christmas, it was like blowing up because they always have lots and lots and lots of specials at like Black Friday and everything with this thing. Because otherwise, regularly, it's like 120, 130 bucks or something, but I think I got it for 65 or something like that. I mean, yeah, they get some pretty big. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't do that around Mother's Day, you know, any of those types of holidays that you can, you know, mothers, they're always putting appliances and kitchen stuff on sale. Yeah, exactly. Gee, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. And so you could definitely do that.
So I wanted to say I like that idea because my kids will not eat mashed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. None of my kids like mushy anything.
Try that.
Well, and these here have been. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna throw these in here too, actually. And if you notice, this wasn't actually intentional, but I've gotten so used to doing this, it just kind of came. I've got a lot of colors even in this pan here. So I've got my red tomatoes, you know, so I've got a lot of colors just even in here right now. Now my chicken was already cooked from there, and my sweet potatoes were already cooked. So again, back to the whole planning ahead of time. Even if you're not planning a meal per se, if you take an hour on the weekend to do a little bit of food prep ahead of time, it's gonna make the process a lot simpler, okay? And so often what I do, I often grocery shop on Saturdays, because I go when my girls are at gymnastics because it's right there, and so it's perfect. And so I'll grocery shop, and then I'll come home, and at some point in time, usually during that day, I will spend about an hour doing a little bit of food prep. So either chopping up, that's what else I needed. Chopping up some sort of greens, you know, maybe breaking off the ends and preparing or cutting that. You know, these are Brussels sprouts that I sliced in the food processor. This is what we had in our curry tonight, was part of it. And so they sliced, so they cook a whole lot faster, which is what I wanted in a curry. I didn't have time to roast them tonight. And so I'll spend like an hour just doing that, and then I don't have a plan for any of it. I just get a bunch of, like greens and some veggie, just a bunch of miscellaneous stuff and prep them in ways that I know I might typically use them, and then just throw them all in the fridge. Greens will last. I've experimented with so many ways of keeping greens. I have had these greens for about a week and a half, and they are not the least bit wilted, nothing wrong with them. They are good to go. This is actually Swiss chard, which may be a miscellaneous vegetable you've never heard of. So Swiss chard is another type of green that has a lot of good just benefits. I can't tell you all the nutrient profile because honestly I don't know it all right now, but it's a lot of good stuff for you. And so what I do to keep my greens longer, I hate the fact of using plastic, but it works. And so what I will do is I will use Ziploc bags or a glass Pyrex dish, but it starts to take up too much room in my refrigerator when I have too many of these. So I will usually use a plastic bag. You see this lonely little piece of paper towel in here? So this little piece of paper towel is what absorbs the excess moisture in here, because that's the problem with your greens. If I had no paper towel in there and I just threw them, I cut them, I prepped them on Saturday, and then I threw them on my bag, zipped them up and threw them in there, the moisture is just hanging out and sitting in there, and that's what's going to make them wilt and get nasty and go bad fast. If you do something as simple as getting a salad spinner or just best you can dry off the greens after you wash them, and put a paper towel in there and zip it up. Try to get as much air out as you can. I feel like that helps as well. These things will last so much longer. That was another thing. Again, I hate food waste, and so what I would do is I would end up buying all this stuff and it would all go bad before I used it. I don't like that. I am not okay with that. And so that's my trick on greens there. Another thing when it comes to preparing your foods for the week, after you go to the grocery, and you may have learned this even so far with minimal cooking experience, that some foods just go bad faster than other foods. So those squash that I have down there, they've been in there for weeks and they're perfectly fine. Whereas those greens are not going to be perfectly fine for weeks, And so what I will generally do at the beginning of the week, let's say it's Monday night and I'm trying to decide what side dish. I got to remember to come back to my protein. And I want to decide what side dishes I'm doing. I will usually look in the refrigerator and literally go, what's going to go bad first? Because I want to make sure I use it. And also the sooner you use it to when it was picked or taken from the farm, the higher nutrient density it has as well. So the faster you can use it, the better it is for you and the less likely you're going to waste it. And so I will look in my refrigerator. I kid you not, I just open the door at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and go, what's going to go bad first? And so I'll see what's in there. And then I'll judge how much time do I have and decide even how to prep something. So like sweet potatoes, for example, if I decided I was going to make sweet potatoes but I was short on time, I might do something like this and get it done really fast. Whereas if I knew I had 2 hours to make dinner, I might go through the effort of slicing them up and roasting them for 30 or 45 minutes, and doing that. So I gauge what's going to go bad first and how long do I have to prepare it. I'm going to come back to the protein before I forget. This is another thing I do because it happens a lot where you say at 3 o'clock, what am I going to cook for dinner? And you open the refrigerator and all your proteins are in your freezer. And you're like, well, gee, that's helpful. I don't really want to stick that steak in the microwave because it seems to defeat the purpose. And so, again, another trick that I've just kind of started doing is in the beginning of the week, Sunday, Monday, somewhere in there, I will go into my freezer, and I have a deep freezer in my basement. I will pick 4 or 5 random proteins. They're totally random, or they may be what's going to go bad first. If it's an older date, something I know. I usually try to vary it so it's not all beef or all pork or whatnot. This is going to be different with everybody based on what you actually eat in your house. We tend to eat a lot of chicken, beef, and pork are our 3 biggest things. And so I will usually try to pick out like either some sort of roast or some sort of steaks or some ground beef or some pork chops or a whole chicken or chicken wings. My husband loves chicken wings. My kids love chicken wings, actually. And then kind of decide from there what I'm going to do. And I will get 3 or 4 of them out and go ahead and put them in my refrigerator. So then over the next few days, they're already thawing. And sometimes what also happens is I look in there that first day and go, what's already thawed out? Because it's not all going to be thawed out already, because like a big roast might take a few more days to be thawed out than some of the other things. And so that's how I kind of keep from going to that whole last minute, I don't have a meat, I don't have a protein, And so I just put them in there a few days ahead of time. And then as the week goes on, I just pick what's fastest, what works best for my time, or what I'm in the mood for. It doesn't really matter. I don't sit aside and go, on Wednesday, I'm going to have this, on Thursday. That works really well for some people, and it just doesn't me. So, let me turn down the baby monitor, or we're going to be hearing lots of interesting noises from up above. So Questions about that? Yes.
This is really refreshing because when I hear about meal planning, I'm picturing like, okay, let me get my calendar, and then on Tuesday, and by Tuesday, like I don't feel like eating that, yes. And so then I don't, and
yeah.
then that's the thing that goes bad in the fridge. So I just like never, I just decided
just kick it to the side.
So I think I would be more your style.
Yes, and you know, I am the type of person that wants to do things the right way, whatever that right way is. And so for years and years and years, I've tried to convince myself, well, this is what everybody says you have to do. And so if I don't want to be stressed, this is what I have to do. And I don't know. I mean, after 5 kids, you can only do so much in reducing your stress level. And so this was my understanding and learning of how to manage that and live life. And here in the neighborhood, as my neighbors know, right around 4:30, 5 o'clock is when all the neighbors come outside. I want to be outside with everybody else. I want to play out there with all the kids too. I don't want to be in here cooking for an hour and a half beforehand. And so, you know, you just kind of do what works for you and just let go of the guilt of what everybody else says you have to do. If something I say works and it doesn't for you, kick it. Like, I mean, there's nothing like golden about this. And so, thank you for commenting on that. Any other questions or thoughts on so far?
Do you ever meal prep? Not plan, but like, you know, make ahead of time and then keep in the refrigerator?
I do, yes. Actually, whatever's left of this will be prepped for tomorrow for a meal. Probably lunchtime. I only have 2 kids at home at lunchtime, and so it'll be a small portion that I can give to 2 kids, you know, and not everything else. But actually this past weekend isn't a good example. James and I were out of town, and so I try to make it as easy as I possibly can for my babysitters because we don't have family in town and it's hard to get somebody to watch the quantity of kids we have overnight for a long time. And so I do as much meal prep ahead of time as possible. And we also have, like I said, 2 kids that are dairy free and the whole family is gluten free. And so I don't expect somebody who doesn't cook that way to have to try to figure out how in the world to cook for my family that way. And so I will do it then. I will say that during those times, I do try to keep it as simple as possible. I don't make big grandiose meals. But then sometimes, like literally, I will intentionally, I've got some big pots because again, there's a lot of us. And so, you know, sometimes pull out the giant cast iron, you know, it's just so heavy. I can get my exercise here, man. Or a Dutch oven, which most people would use for something big, like a roast or something. And I'll literally do like that in this so I can make twice as much and have it for another day. I don't typically cook a full meal in and of itself for another day without having another purpose. If I'm cooking it for another day, we're probably having it tonight too, just so I don't have to make 2 meals worth of days. Usually I will keep most things refrigerated. Things that seem to work really well for me in advance to make a lot of and freeze are soups. Of course, it's not as preferential during the summer for a lot of people. They prefer not to have soups as much. But soups work really well in the winter. We actually had a birthday party in February that soups is what we served. It was a whole bunch of soups and chilies and stuff. I think you may have been here. And I intentionally made like 4 huge pots of soup that I knew was going to be more than we needed and then froze the rest of it. And so then there were like 5 other days that I didn't have to cook dinner because I intentionally made a whole lot of extra soup that I could just throw in the freezer.
I don't even have any on
Yeah, soups is something that, you know, I'm still working at. There's some that I've gotten good at, but there's some that I'm still definitely working at. But yeah, again, it's baby steps though, 1 step at a time. Like there's one soup that I make that everybody really likes. I just call it a sausage soup. It's the simplest way of explaining it, but it has like pre-made like Italian sausages in it or whatnot. And it basically has chicken broth, the sausages, and whatever veggies I decide I'm gonna throw in there the day. I mean, there's an actual recipe for it, but I've gone way away from that. It's literally whatever I have on hand. And everybody likes it every time because the sausage is like, gives it so much flavor. And so it's, you can't really go wrong with whatever you throw in there, you know. Some people are really weird about textures of certain types of food. I was definitely one of those children growing up. I still can be depending, but I'm not as much so. So you gotta think with certain, you know, with family and kids and everything, if there's a texture that they're gonna just despise, you know, maybe leave it out or put it in afterwards or whatever, you know, you kinda gotta judge there. But like with soups, if it's something that I know is gonna cook super fast, I'm not gonna put it in the very beginning because I don't want it to be mush. I don't think anybody in the house likes mush. Just the thought of it's like gross to me. Yeah, so as far as flavor, so one question, typically when you follow recipes, the thing that you get a for sure on is your flavor, because they've measured out all the specific ingredients. So like every time you have this recipe, it's going to taste like this, right? Which is nice if you really want to mess with it. And what I typically do now, I probably do an actual recipe maybe once a week. And the rest of the week, it's what I'm teaching you guys here. But flavor-wise, for starters, your oils are going to give flavor to your food. So whatever oil or butter or ghee or whatever you're using, that's going to be part of your flavor. And then your herbs and spices. So I keep my herbs and spices up here. I'm sorry, you can't see around the corner there. It's nothing fancy. It's literally just my herbs and spices sitting here. There's one kind of trick of the trade though, two that I'll mention that I do. So, I'll buy my herbs and spices usually the first time at the grocery, and then I actually buy them in bulk, which I could tell you where and how and all that afterwards if you're interested, because it's way less expensive, especially because I tend to get organic, to buy them in bulk. And then I just keep reusing my things and double up. But the second kind of trick of the trade is this. So I have lots of ball jars. Having food sensitivities in our house, there's a lot of things we have to avoid when it comes to spices and such. So a while ago, I had to start making certain spices because they would have ingredients in them that we couldn't have. And so that kind of led me to the whole, we weren't always sold like prepackaged taco meat or whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong about that. But what happens is when you make it in bulk, so this is my taco right here, my taco seasoning. When you make it in bulk, you can use it for more than just tacos. So like, let's say you have ground beef on hand. You have no idea what you're going to do, but you have ground beef. You have some tortilla chips. There's a couple of tomatoes that are getting ready to go bad if you don't use them soon, and maybe some avocados. So you're like, okay, well that sounds kind of Mexican-ish to me. So what I do is I taste test it a little at a time. I made a taco mix, just a simple thing that I found online with my bulk herbs and spices. But you don't have to do this. You can still buy a prepackaged taco mix and do the same thing. So, and then I wrote on top about how much per pound of meat. So this is 1 1/4 tablespoon per pound of meat, whatever that is. So then I can use it if I want like Mexican flavored chicken or beef or whatever it is I'm doing, and I don't have to be tied towards thinking, when we have tacos, I need taco spice. Like you get a little flexible. And then I have like, this is Cajun seasoning. And again, you can buy, you can see, I don't have any fillers in it because it all sticks together, so I have to shake it up beforehand. This is my favorite burger spice. This tastes really good with burgers, but I also use it occasionally if I have ground pork or something. I just want to give it some flavor. I'll throw some of this in it. This is kind of my secret to easy, don't screw it up, herbs and spices, because there's certain ones that really do work well together. When you're first learning how to combine herbs and spices, I remember I actually went to a cooking class probably about 5 years or so ago, and I told the lady, like, I don't know how to cook. I can mess everything up. Like, you got to help me. She would probably laugh to hear that I'm teaching a cooking class now. But, and I remember her telling me, well, you just experiment. You just put different ones in there. And I'm like, no. Because then I'm going to end up with like cinnamon and garlic and God knows what, But what she failed to say, or what I failed to hear, one or the other, was to, when you're first learning how to do that, look at some recipes that you're familiar with. Or if you like Italian food, for example, what are typical Italian herbs and spices? If you've been, if you've been making Italian food, you might know like rosemary and thyme or oregano. You start to notice patterns of them. Again, it doesn't happen the first time you step into the kitchen, but you start to notice patterns of things that tend to go together. And then you just slowly, sometimes you're still gonna mess it up. And I'll tell you a way to fix that in a minute, which is on that one side of that paper. But you experiment slowly. You can always add more. You cannot take it out. So slowly add more. And what I typically do, which I will do with this before I give it to you, usually when I'm cooking, and I used to think this was so strange when, I won't say who, another person that I know would taste the meal, like the whole time she was cooking. I'm like, why does she keep tasting it? Well, because she's making sure it tastes good. And that's one thing I have learned from cooking shows is that's what they do. Like that's what Gordon Ramsay or whoever, tells you to do, is to make sure you taste it before you plate it, before you serve it. And so that's how you actually learn. You taste it and you go, which I'll show you now on the back of that little sheet I gave you. And you go, ooh, this is a little too, bland. I tend to do that with soups. They tend to end up too bland. I don't have enough in them. And so on this little soup, you'll see some little things that you can do to help that. So it says add saltiness or sweetness. So if it's too bland, consider adding something on here or something else. Like another salty thing that's good that's not on here is bacon. bacon. Bacon makes everything taste good. So if you, Wendy and I were just talking about bacon today. We were sitting outside in the fresh air, and all of a sudden we're like, there's bacon somewhere. We were over at the summit. It smelled really good. So, bacon is a salty thing. That's why people make, it sounds like I have dogs upstairs. I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, so you just kind of go down. Now, I will not claim rights for this. I did not create this list. This is from a gal online. This is actually for salad. She has a course called Build a Better Salad, which was actually a really awesome little helpful online course, but I don't think it's available anymore. But she does still have on her website, I think, a downloadable ebook if you sign up for her, email or whatnot, and it includes this and a lot of other helpful tips on how to build a better salad, which is kind of like this method for salads. So, especially in the summertime, that's really nice when you don't want to cook all the time, but you get bored eating the same old salad, like you can only have a regular salad so many times before you're sick of it. That's cute. See, she's just agreeing with me, like, yeah. So this is a helpful little take-home tip. This is my copy that I literally keep right here on my fridge. So in case I mess something up or I can't, oh gosh, I don't know what to do with this, I'll look up there and go, okay, there's an idea. I can try that. And so that's just a little helpful thing there. So I've talked a lot about cooking with oils in some form or fashion. Some people avoid oils for whatever reason or are cautious not to heat oils too high. Another thing that you can do is water cook things and then add the oil afterwards. So for example, if you are going to steam something, if you are going to steam your broccoli or whatever it is until it's cooked, and then afterwards put a little oil on it. So then you're not technically heating your oil, you don't have to worry about it going rancid or anything like that, and you can have a little more control over putting it on there. So just to throw out, that's another idea. You can also use, if you're adventurous, you can use good quality like organic lard or tallow in your cooking, as well as oils and butter and ghee. Questions? Comments?
So oil goes rancid if you cook it too much?
Yes, it does. Usually there's a lot of debate out there on every type of oil has a different, what they call smoke point, and different oils will go rancid at different temperatures. I honestly could not tell you the exact temperature of all of the oils. I just have a general idea of which ones are better than others for cooking. Like when you're sauteing at a lower heat, you can use an olive oil. You don't want to pop olive oil up high. It's not really the best idea to cook your veggies on olive oil and roast them at 425. But
do that all the time.
okay, the debate out there.
Does it make it taste bad? Or
It's not. No, it's not the taste. It's all the good, fun medical stuff it does inside you that's not so great for you. So again, there's a lot of argument on all sides of the spectrum there. I also use, you all might laugh at my Costco size coconut oil. It takes me about 3 or 4 months to go through this, but that's a big thing of oil. Coconut oil has a high smoke point, but obviously not everybody likes the taste of it. Yes. Yeah, I don't think it has a very strong flavor. I think it's just enough of a flavor, and it's supposed to be better with high heat as well. So if you Google online, you could find 500 different opinions. I can send you my recommendations if you want, but just on which oils are better for you in general and which ones are better in heat or cold, like salads and stuff like that. So. Sure. I would usually, coconut oil has a higher smoke point, so I would usually use coconut oil, or I will tell you that I will use bacon grease from Healthy, bacon, healthy, you can take that for what you will. And then butter, if you're good with butter. Sorry. Apparently they've forgotten how to shut a door up there. That's what I most commonly use, and again, if you are worried about the oils, you can also do it with water and then put your oil on afterwards. So there it is. There it is. There's that door. For those of you watching by video, my kids are going crazy upstairs. Yes?
The coconut oil, it's solid?
It is until it's like 72 degrees or something like that.
Heat it first and then toss it?
Yes, I do. That is one thing that I don't use my microwave often, but that is one thing I throw in my microwave because it'll take me 30 seconds to a minute to heat it up just enough to pour over and then scoop it around my bowl. And so, yeah, I will usually, I've got a bunch of bowls like this, and then I'll just mix it up, put my salt and pepper or whatever in it, and then dump it on my pan that I'm cooking on. So, other question? Yeah? Yeah.
I feel like there's like garlic and thyme and rosemary.
Right.
But do you have some things or some different things that you guys?
Okay, so the question, if you didn't hear, if you want to add flavor to vegetables, like what's the best like options or whatnot there? Honestly, most of the time I do end up going easy with salt, pepper, garlic. But again, I experiment. It depends. Like there's certain vegetables like beets, for example. If anybody's into that, I personally hate beets. We keep trying. I'm trying to like find a way that we'll enjoy them. My husband likes them, and he's the only one in the family that likes them.
I think it's an Asian thing.
And maybe that's what it is. It's an Asian thing.
Because you find it a lot in
Is it more? Okay, maybe that's what it is. Well, beets are supposed to be so good for you, so I keep trying to like them. So far, the closest I've gotten is pickled beets, are the closest I've gotten to actually being okay with the flavor. And usually what I'll do, honestly, is I'll even take pickled beets and I'll throw it in something like that. So then it actually is kind of just a little bit of sweetness, but I don't really taste the full-on beet, you know. And my kids are like any other kid, and they have their preferences and their thoughts and their likes and dislikes and everything. And so there's just certain things that we slip in there. Mushrooms. Okay, so shiitake mushrooms are supposed to be really good for the immune system. My kids despise mushrooms. So what I will almost always do is either cut them really small or even shred them up in the food processor, and then I will throw them in something where they are never going to notice it. They often will see me cooking it, so the older ones will be like, "You've got mushrooms in there," you know. But honestly, like they don't taste it, and so they don't complain too much about it when it is like, yesterday I made a soup and they were bigger than usual, and they're like, "Oh, there's a big old mushroom," and I'm like, "Oh, hush, just eat your soup." But so stuff like that I will try to shred up a lot of times. But to answer your question, like with beets, for example, I've often seen in recipes, people will serve beets with goat cheese. That's like really common to serve beets with goat cheese. And what else is it? There is I can't even think of what it is now that I'm trying to think of it, but there is a specific grouping of spices I seem to see very common over and over and over again. And I think it's something about like the pungency of beets. I won't go to the beach. Beets, that those flavors go nicely with the goat cheese and whatever else it is that I'm not remembering. And so what I would do is I would just experiment with just looking online, like a general, do not, if you don't want to be busy and on for hours, go to Pinterest and search every recipe on the planet that you will probably never, ever, ever, ever make. You may, and if that works, then go for it. But if you're thinking, oh, I need to go look at recipes, don't do that. Just go to Google and just type in how to cook beets. You know, if it's something very simple, or roasted beets, or sliced beets, or whatever, and then you'll get examples of, and you don't have to be like so specific, oh, that one looks good, and that one looks good, and 3 hours later you have 50 beet recipes and you'll try one, maybe, if you're lucky. So, shoot, I had a thought that I was going somewhere with that. Yeah, but you do, I don't know where I was going with that, but you tend to find patterns that seem to be over and over again. And then if you notice the patterns and you try them, and, you know, outside of that, again, just kind of being creative and trying. You know, if you notice, like on this little list here, that a particular vegetable is one of these things as it is, like if it's a spicy vegetable, you know, you can see it says add sweetness or cream. So, you know, like with that, you might serve it, if you eat dairy, you might serve it with some cheese or something to like cool it off. You know, like I love roasted red peppers and goat cheese. It's like the perfect combination, especially on the grill. Like slice them, grill them, goat cheese. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So that might be another way of just kind of experimenting with that. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm going to look at a couple of these. So batch cooking is something I do regularly. Variety, I've mentioned that. Okay, so failure. Some of the things you try are going to flop. It's just how it is. So you can, you know, if it's not absolutely horrendous, suck it up, be a grown-up, and eat it for the one night so you don't waste the food. You know, maybe try again in smaller portions if you want to. But just know that you're not going to get in, you're not going to grow if you're not willing to try a little bit. So you may baby step it into trying. You may baby step it by just being like, you know what, I'm not changing anything else right now except I'm going to try to prepare foods different. You know, you might stop at that. If you can think of what's one thing that I've talked about tonight, what's one thing that's going to make my life a little bit easier when it comes to cooking, which one thing can I start with? You know, and then kind of go from there. On that note, with the veggies, one thing I didn't mention earlier, in addition to trying to cook things different ways, a lot of times we get stuck in a rut with getting the same broccoli, carrots, maybe cauliflower, potatoes, and you're like, I don't know what else out there I like, you know. Instead of like deciding you're going to be Superwoman and go out and get, you know, 50,000 new vegetables in 1 week that are going to end up going bad because you're not going to end up cooking them all. Pick one new veggie each week. If you have kids that are picky and you want to involve them, have them pick one new veggie. It doesn't matter what it is. Pick one new veggie, whatever's the prettiest, whatever they think's the funniest looking, or whatever it is, one new veggie, And then it's just one. You're not doing this with 50. Then you get home and you Google how to cook such and such. And so then you've got one new vegetable that you're adding. And over time, you start to add more and more and more new vegetables. You're going to find some that you all hate, and that's fine. You know you hate it now. But you're going to find a lot that you decide, wow, I never knew I actually liked this. Or you try it once and you hate the way it tasted because you cooked cabbage in your soup and you didn't like that. But then next time you try grilling it and it tastes really good, you know, you might just feel like there's a couple different ways you might. So don't give up. You know, like when you're learning to feed little babies and kids, they tell you that it takes an average of 9 to 12 times of trying something before they will accept it. So you can take that as an adult too. It might take you 9 to 12 tries of trying something before even you're willing to accept it. Yes. Further questions, comments about what I've talked about so far?
I have a question about your greens.
Sure.
Do you usually buy like the big, like fresh greens, or do you usually buy like the bags, you know?
It depends. As often as I can, we try to eat organic. So usually we're actually part of a local buying club here called the Whole Life Buying Club. And I get a lot of it from there, and it's literally direct from the farm. So it comes to me in a big paper bag full of my vegetables. And so it is just whatever it is. If I haven't ordered from there, or I haven't bought from there, and I'm just getting them at the grocery store, I will usually just go to the organic section and see what they have and how much it is and whether I'm going to get it there or get it, you know, on the other side. And I will usually get the big things. But if time is a concern and you're afraid, you know, like that's just going to be one more thing that's going to tip you over the time frame, get the bagged ones. Just make sure you check the date. And it's not going to go bad too far. And even keeping them well, and you know, better in the fridge. Even if you just open it up and shove yourself a paper towel in there, you're probably going to let it keep a little bit longer than you would otherwise. And another thing is at the store, they tend, like let's say you have a bag, they tend to keep them stored the same way. And so like all the greens will be laying like on the bottom, on the bottom, on the bottom, on the bottom as they're stacked in their packets, and then they just stick them in the same way. And so even if you can just kind of shake it up and get it to like mix around, get that air and that water to circulate a little bit, it's going to help them last a little bit longer as well. So I usually do get the big ones because I've learned they really don't take that much time to prepare. But if I was starting very fresh and trying to do too much at once, I might still just get the bags and just simplify life a little bit. Like chard, for example. Chard comes on kind of like stalks like kale. If you're familiar with kale, it's got like a harder stalk on it. And so most people will either eat the greens or eat the stalks, like cut up. Like we actually had the stalk part. I don't even know if that's the technical term for it. There you go. But we actually had the stalk stem part of it in our curry tonight because I had time to cook it a little softer, and it was just one thing kind of mixed in the rest of it that nobody really noticed. And then the greens here, you know, you can cook them however. You can put them in a salad, or you can put them, saute them, or throw them in your food like I did just at the very end there. So that's pretty much what I got for you. So anything else is questions. If you have something I didn't talk about that you've thought I would talk about or you're dying to know, feel free to ask.
So I have a question.
Sure.
You put a bunch of stuff in that pot
Uh-huh.
that I've never put together.
Okay.
How do you decide what to put together? Is it really just trial and error, or like are you thinking through like, oh, this will be sweet,
Well-
this will be, because literally like
You're like,
you've never cooked
nope, that
it.
wouldn't have come in my mind. So I'll recap what I have in
I
here.
want everything in separate piles on my plate, so the idea of putting everything all together.
Which is okay too. Okay, thank you for saying that actually, because I wanted to mention that. Some people tell me, Tara, my kids will not touch anything that's all mixed up. They might not admit they themselves won't, but they're going to tell me their kids won't. And honestly, I was the kid growing up. My mom could attest to this. Kid you not, she would put my food, not only was I super picky, but she would put my food on a plate, and I kid you not, I would eat all of one thing, and I would turn my plate. And then I would eat all of another, and then I would turn my plate until it was all gone. How ridiculous is that? So not only and it couldn't be touching, so I get it, because I was there. And honestly, when we first started eating healthier, my kids were all right there with you. And so it's been a slow process. But let's say a lot of these other things can still be helpful in the sense of, you know, roasting or sauteing individual items, and then you yourself can decide what you're willing to kind of put together. With me, this particular thing is, I've kind of combined most of these together at some point anyway. Honestly, like I know back to this kind of list right here with the different flavors and stuff, I know that the tomatoes, the sun-dried tomatoes, they have a really nice, like juicy kind of, I don't know if pungent's the right word, but flavor. They're going to add sweet potatoes, sweet obviously, so those combine really well together. The greens can be kind of bitter, and so it's like I don't want just bitter on my plate by itself, you know, like I wouldn't want to eat, honestly, the chard. A lot of people will just saute chard, and I don't like it just sauteed by itself. It's kind of bleh to me. And so when I combine, like the asparagus can also be a little bit bitter, and then the chicken is honestly kind of bland for the most part. It's got a little bit of flavor, but it's more bland than anything. And then I haven't actually added salt yet because I wanted to test sometimes with the, I know from experimentation that the tomatoes, the sun-dried tomatoes have a little bit of herbs and spices in them already, and I don't want to overpower it, so I need to taste it first before I go dumping a bunch of salt on it. Some people are really concerned about putting salt on all their food. My thought is this, is if you're not eating a bunch of prepackaged stuff, you're probably not putting too much salt on your food. The majority of people get too much salt in their diet because of prepackaged foods. So if you do eat a lot of prepackaged foods and you're just starting, you may be careful with how much you put on it, but just to throw that out there.
I probably wouldn't eat if it didn't have salt and pepper on it.
Salt. Oh yeah, I put salt and pepper on almost everything. And another thing too, again, you can always add, but you cannot take it away. And so there are some tricks, like with soup. If you get soup too salty, you can supposedly put like a potato in there or an apple in there and it will absorb some of the salt. So there are a few tricks, but like that's not gonna work with this. If this gets too salty, I gotta add a whole bunch of something else to the mix, you know? And so even if it's under salty and you set it on the table so people can decide how salty they wanna make it, that's another option too. So with these particular things, it's kind of both. It was trial and error, but it's also knowing a little bit about each thing that I put in there and knowing that it's not gonna be overpowered by any one thing. I got a lot of various flavors, so it provides a little more of a balance. You know, if you think of like an orchestra or something, you don't typically want just one of something. You want a little bit of everything in there to an extent. That doesn't always, you know, that's not always the case, but yeah, that's a good question. But again, if you're not comfortable, this is what Melissa Julin calls a hot plate. So her idea is basically just, you know, whatever veggies, whatever meat, you throw it all together and you know, with some oil and some seasonings. And so that is not an idea original to me. It's just one that I have, you know, continued to learn and turn into whatever I do. So, good question.
How do you roast Brussels sprouts?
How do I roast Brussels sprouts? Well, I would not roast these because these are, you just recently had this, yes.
For the first time like 2 weeks ago.
She did.
So I go to Village Anchor, and they have on their menu.
Oh yeah, roasted Brussels sprouts.
And I never thought of it.
Yes.
And I ordered it one time and it had nuts and stuff
Yes.
in it. And it was so good and I have been thinking about it.
I could try that. So I should have left a couple whole ones. I didn't think to leave a couple of whole ones. So, you know, so a little Brussels sprout basically looks like a mini cabbage. Same family, whole thing. You always cut off the end. My husband learned that the hard way. You cut off the end of the Brussels sprout. And then if you're going to roast them, I recommend if they're big Brussels sprouts, you got to at least cut them in half. Possibly even quarters if they're really big and fat. You know, if they're smaller, you know, like these were really big Brussels sprouts. Usually they're about, you know, they're a little smaller than this. And so then again, a little bit of oil, not enough to drown it, just enough to get it a little bit wet. Salt, pepper, if you want to add anything else. And then you throw it in the oven at like 400, 425. And you can look up again, you just kind of Google how long to roast, you know, and it depending again on how small you cut them and how, you know. So in the beginning, when you're getting a better eye on how long things take to cook, check often, you know, 'cause again, you can always cook it longer, you can't take it back. And so a lot of people like it when their Brussels sprouts start to get just a little bit crispy, just the edges start to get a little bit crispy is most people's preferred. They taste amazing with bacon and nuts. If you want to go through the extra effort of doing that, they taste really good with that. Most of the time when I do them, it's oil, salt, and pepper. Occasionally something random that I throw in there every now and then. There's a lot of good stuff in herbs and spices. There's a lot of good, just nutritious stuff in them, but stuff, you like that really good technical term there. But, you know, at the same time, I'm like not going to throw everything in my cabinet in there because it's going to be disgusting, you know? And so like you might pick one, like rosemary, you know, and try that on there. That's actually common with Brussels sprouts and with asparagus as well. Rosemary commonly goes with it. And just see what you think about the flavor. Kind of make a mental note for later, like, or even a written note. Another thing, I'll show you this. Another thing that I do is if I do print out a recipe or concoct something that was just over the top and I'm never going to remember it again, which that doesn't happen often, but I will write it down. So like if I have, here's a funny one my daughter actually wrote on. Flourless chocolate muffins. This is a favorite in the family here. Look, kids loved them. She wrote on there, amazing, yum, tastes like a soft brownie. So like I will go on there and they're made with avocado of all the random thing. Avocado and nut butter is like the base of them, but they do taste really good. And so I will often write a little note. Even in the few cookbooks that I do have, I'll write a little note on what worked well and what didn't. Like this here was braised pork roast with rosemary, and I wrote the sauce was amazing. So I wanted to specifically remember that for next time. The that sauce was really good. You know, like make sure you make the sauce, because that was like one of those, if you want to make the sauce, here's how you do it, you know. So I'm like, don't forget that. Speaking of cookbooks, if you do want a cookbook that kind of works along this idea, Laura Wieringa, for those of you that know her, tuned me into this one. Mark Bittman's Kitchen Express. Mark Bittman has a lot of cookbooks, but this one here, the back, do you have 20 minutes to make a meal? It's this idea is what he does, is what he kind of teaches you. And so he'll go through and tell you, I mean, in literally like paragraphs. It doesn't have like a list of how much of all the ingredients. He gives you an idea of how much to do in it. And in the very beginning, he kind of gives kind of an intro, just like I did, like on how to choose and whatnot. But then the whole book is like, if you got this, this, and this on hand, try to make this. You know what I mean? Like throw it together. And so I haven't made tons of them, but the ones I have made, almost all of them have been fantastic, and they've been very quick. That's the whole point, Express. Quick, healthy, good, whole food like type meals. So that's a good cookbook. And then also, if for the recipes you do, I'm not recipe-less. I definitely have recipes that I enjoy. I have my own personal little binder here, the dorky picture that I colored at one point in time. And I have it separated, because I'm a nerd, by like vegetables, beef, you know, poultry. But the recipes in here I don't have every recipe on the planet. These are only recipes I really liked, or the family really liked, that we're gonna use again. If I make a recipe, I almost always print it out. I hate staring at my phone. I want something bigger. And I put it in a clear protector while I'm cooking, so I don't destroy it while I'm cooking. But if I make a recipe, I want to know if it's good. If it's not good, I'm not going to keep it. It's going in the trash. And then I'm going to also put on there like what was good about it. Like this one says, very good, everyone enjoyed it. Or if I adjust it, like on here, this one called for cayenne pepper. I have cayenne pepper on hand, so I put cumin in it. So I wrote on there, I just wrote cumin, so that I remembered next time I did this and it worked. You know, this was something I could do. And again, I keep very few in here. It doesn't look like very few. This is years worth of recipes though, so this isn't something I did overnight. Yeah, some of them are ripped out of magazines, some of them are printed off online. Some of them are the spice mixes that I do, like I will print those off, and I actually, most of them come in like a smaller size when you actually make them, so I will write on there, you know, for 4 times the size, enough to fill a ball jar is basically usually what I make, and then I will go ahead and write out, so I don't have to recalculate every single time how much to double it, to triple it, to, you know, quadruple it or whatnot. So I keep stuff like that in here too. Sure.
I know you guys are gluten-free, but what about
Yeah.
rices or pastas or
Good question. Well, obviously those are going to fall under your carbs in that section there. So, you know, if you're going to have it with each meal, or meals here and there, you know, that's a really good question. You know, obviously most pastas cook fairly quickly. So those are some, you know, for the most part, some of you probably tried. They don't typically refrigerate and reheat very well. I mean, if you are going to reheat them, put a little water in it when you reheat it, so it kind of gets a little of that moisture back. Bread-wise, I honestly haven't made breads in a long time. Is there a particular?
Well, I guess I feel like I can make vegetable, like combine some vegetables,
Uh-huh.
and I feel like I'm
Missing like a,
I need
Sure.
some sort of rice or some sort of.
yes, okay. That'll give me a little something there. So we do eat rice occasionally. We do eat quinoa occasionally. We do eat a few other random grains. And so as far as prepping and not taking so long, well, the Instant Pot can do this, but I've never actually tried doing it. But we also, since we have an Asian and a few in our family, have a rice cooker. I think these are like $15, so they're pretty cheap. This one makes 3 cups of rice, I believe, 3 dry cups of rice, which ends up being like 6 full cups. It's a lot of rice. We don't always, honestly, but we often do. I'm trying to add a few more greens for my growing children to stop feeling hungry all day. But with rice, you can actually freeze rice after you've made it. So that's one way to do it. If you make a huge pot of rice and you know you're obviously not going to eat it all, you can throw it in a Ziploc, get the air out of it, throw it in your freezer. You can also, usually whenever I make rice, regardless of what I'm making it for, I always make a full pot, because I can always grab it later in the refrigerator for another meal. Like even like something like this, like if I didn't put sweet potatoes in it, I could have thrown rice in it. I could have thrown quinoa in it. You know, I could have thrown any of those beans. Like we have beans too. Like if you keep canned beans on hand, or if you want to make them ahead of time, you can put that in your hour of prep, you know, on the weekends. Honestly, we don't eat a lot of beans, so I just get quality canned beans. And so then when we do, I just open up a can and throw them in there. They pretty much just have to heat up. They don't really have to cook. Again, that would take off a lot of time if you go from scratch with some of those things. Rice in my rice cooker takes about 30 minutes to cook. Doesn't have a real long time, but sometimes I don't think about it till like 5 minutes before the meal. It'd be nice to just have some already in the refrigerator that I could just pull out and heat up, you know? And so, so you could definitely do that with those types of grains as far as making them ahead. Quinoa, I'm sure would freeze well. I've never tried it, but I honestly think it probably would. Pretty much, like I was saying earlier, anything that I make, if I can at all, and if I have enough, like I said, we shop at Costco a lot, so we get a lot of bulk stuff, period. I will try to make more than one serving of, for whatever it is. Like tonight, you know, like tonight I showed you all in one, but those sweet potatoes that I just threw in there were from what we had at dinner tonight. Like I cooked a huge thing. I just cooked all the sweet potatoes I had on hand, minus the demos over here. I cooked all the ones I had on hand, and then I was like, oh, well, I can use it for that. Honestly, I wasn't planning on doing that. That was just kind of a, oh, that would be good in there. So just threw them in there. Yeah. Does that answer your question at all, or a little bit? Or sorry, that is a harder question for me to answer. Yeah. Obviously, if you make breads and you can freeze them, you can always do that. Make several batches and freeze them. We do that with muffins. When we make the muffins, we'll make several batches and freeze half of them. So.
Do you have any like freezer tips I can find? I feel like even with like freezing meat or rice.
Sure.
Like, I don't know if it's because I have a drawer freezer. It just frozen over to sleep.
Freezer tips. Good questions. I definitely don't know if I'm the freezer master. But the key, I feel like, for most freezer stuff is get as much oxygen out as you possibly can of whatever it is. Obviously, if you're storing something in a jar or a container, you have to leave what they call headspace. Otherwise, it will explode in your freezer. So don't do that. Been there, done that, learned the hard way. So like this, if I had this full of chicken broth or something and I filled it all the way to the rim, it's going to explode in my freezer. Like there has to be a room in there for it to expand. Because it will expand when it gets cold. But so, so for the most part, you know, you just want to get all the air out as much as you can. Even with like when I'm doing, if I was to do rice or something like that, after putting it in a bag, I would flatten it out. I would, you know, a lot of times what I do, I fold them over, I push all the air out, you know, and then just lay them as flat as I can in their freezer. You know, some people keep like an inventory of what's in their freezer. I've tried. Falls by the wayside every time. I just don't keep up with it when I take things out. I don't keep up with it. And so what I will do periodically is I'll go in my freezer and kind of dig towards the back. What is hiding in here? You know, like let's get this out and use it before it does go bad. You know, for the most part, I don't seem to have problems like with meats and stuff. We don't usually have extras, but if I do have extra of something I'm going to throw in the freezer, I would put it in a bag or I would wrap it really tightly and really well. I mean, I feel like oxygen's kind of like the biggest deal there as far as it getting freezer burn or, you know, anything like that. You don't want to just put saran wrap around it because then it's going to get freezer burnt. Trying to think if anything jogs my memory about the freezer. Yeah, I am organized enough that I try, if possible, to keep like shelves with certain types of food on it. So that if I know I'm going to make smoothies, I know like all my smoothie type frozen berries or whatnot are kind of all in the same general area. So I'm not digging all over the freezer looking for each individual thing. All of my meat is primarily at the lower part of the thing. Obviously, it doesn't always work well if you get something big that just won't go into that place, you know, but as a general rule of thumb, I try to keep it somewhat organized. Same with my pantry. I try to keep things in a general, you know, area. All my breakfast stuff is in a general area, or my beans and my canned goods are in a general area. It does help, obviously, if you have things close to where you need them. Like, you know, that's why I keep my herbs and spices here. You don't want them, like, if I didn't have this and I had a cabinet here, you don't want to put your herbs and spices right over because you don't want them to get too hot all the time. They basically lose flavor, they lose their nutrition and stuff if they get warm too often, and so you don't want to put them directly by the stove or like right beside the stove there. You wouldn't want to do that. But I try to think efficiently when kitchen. I don't want to be walking over here to get my herbs and spices and then walk back over here, unless you just want good exercise and you want to go back and forth the whole time. Yeah, I mean, you could. Yeah, so that's about all I can think of freezer-wise that really stands out, is kind of have an idea of where, a general idea. We have a deep freezer too, and my deep freezer is pretty much all meat because we order like huge portions of meat, like a fourth of a cow, so there's like a whole bunch of meat down there that'll last us for like 6 months, you know, and so it's just all meat down there. So.
What if you have a family who won't eat leftovers?
No, I have
That's
those.
me.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw that one out.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not unusual, but
Sure.
like, you know.
Well, I guess my question, I might get a little precocious here, but my question with that might come to, what do they want more, food or nothing? Or with you, if it's yourself personally, what do you want more, the time it takes to make a brand new meal or dealing with the fact that it's a leftover and eating it? And with leftovers, you don't always have to eat them the same way they were prepared the first time. So, for example, the sweet potatoes. We had the sweet potatoes as a side dish by themselves earlier, and now they're going to go in this dish right here, put together. Sometimes it's not uncommon. What I will often do, and even at the beginning of the week in that prep time, is I will go ahead and cook a whole chicken. I have no idea what I'm doing with it. I'll cook the whole thing, and then throughout the week, I keep it in the refrigerator, and I will decide what I'm going to do with it here and there. And so I might pull it out to add to a new dish. So the chicken's technically left over, but I've added it to something new. And so, it kind of comes down to like a cost-benefit analysis for those mathematical types of you, is what's it worth to you? Would you rather spend the time making a brand new meal and dealing with the time that's take, or suck it up a few times and then afterwards probably get a little more comfortable with it because you just saved a lot of time and you can now go do something else you'd rather do than cook? That's a good question. I mean, honestly, with my family, especially with kids, I can't speak to husbands. They're adults. Cannot make that, that call there. But with kids, this is something I think about often, because a lot of people, especially if I'm doing a healthy food specifically type thing, people are like, but my kids will only eat this or they'll only eat this. I really kind of think back to our grandparents and great-grandparents. They didn't ask their kids what they wanted to eat. They made their meals, and the meal was the meal, and if they didn't eat it, they didn't eat it. And I know some people feel like that's kind of harsh, but honestly, that's kind of the way that I've taken it, and my kids have become pretty darn good eaters. With that being said, that doesn't mean they're going to enjoy and love everything that I make. But for the most part, they're not going to complain the whole time because they know this is what it is. And I'll give them the option sometimes. You don't have to eat it, but you're not getting anything else. This is the option. So, adults, obviously, spouses, I can't do anything there for you. Other than saying, this is what I've made, this is what we have, or you can make yourself a sandwich. So, yeah, good question, though.
I mean, I'm pretty good with, okay, we've got chicken, and we'll do Mexican one night.
Sure.
And we'll do, sweet and sour or something else the next night.
Right.
I try to...
But if you made a big batch of something like that, or yeah.
It's okay, it better freeze because they aren't going to want to save it.
Right. And some things you can always look up if you're unsure. Some things freeze really well and some things don't. When I make soups, sometimes there's certain vegetables that I will wait until I've removed half of the soup to freeze and then put those veggies in, because I personally don't think frozen potatoes taste really good after you've thawed it and cooked it again. Now, if you don't mind a little stewish in your soup instead of clear soup, then it might just make it a little stewy, it might just make it a little thicker. But you just kind of learn that trial and error too, what tends to taste better after it's frozen. But yeah, I honestly don't freeze a lot. It doesn't usually last long enough for me to freeze it, unless it's soup and I intentionally make a gigantic portion of it. Soup freezes really well, so most soups do anyway. So, good question.
So for lunches.
Sure.
I know leftovers, when we
Right.
usually eat leftovers for lunch, but our schedules are kind of crazy, and
Yeah.
so there are a lot of times where we need to just have a quick lunch.
Right.
And not really sure, I guess, how to go about preparing.
Yeah, lunches can be hard because you could, like you said, always have leftovers. That's obviously one option. We do that a lot, but depending on where you're at and how much time you have and if you have access to heating it up, if it's something that needs to be heated, that may not be the best option. I've had to kind of walk this one a little bit. This is the first year my kids have been in school. We've homeschooled up until this year, and so this year I had to figure out, holy smokes, what do I do for lunches? And so honestly, in my head, if you're I don't know if you are or not, but if you are thinking about it from a nutritional perspective, I just kind of convinced myself from the get-go that lunch is probably going to be the least nutritious meal we have of the day, and I go as simple as I can. And so it's not going to be something like this unless it's leftovers. It might be like with the kids, some quality, lunch meat or cheese sticks or whatnot. I get the best of what I can and what I do get, but I just kind of have come to the understanding that this is probably going to be the least healthy meal of the day because of convenience, because convenience kind of wins out there. And so obviously if you were to look up or her book, the book is free actually, I think, this gal, I can send you guys, if you give me your email address, I can send it to you, her salad thing. That's a really helpful thing if you like salads and if you like variety in salads, because she teaches you, even in the little book, kind of how to make a variety of different salads kind of the easier way, you know, and so then you don't get bored having the same thing every day for lunch. But obviously you can prepare that ahead of time as well. I've never tried, I've seen and heard of people doing like the mason jar salads or something, where you basically put everything in it and then you put the oil on bottom maybe, or separate. I don't even remember because I've never tried it. But, and then they'll do enough to do for like 5 days or whatever it is ahead of time. But lunches are hard, you know, especially if you don't have access to it. To heat it up if it's something that needs to be heated up. In the winter, soups are really easy to do for lunch. You just pack it in a thermos if you want to, but I mean, you could in the summer, but a lot of people just don't want to, so.